Hi there folks, Rich here. Hope you're all doing very well today. This video is going to focus on how we use Kontakt on a daily basis in Studio One. The idea here is to make sure that we're fully aware of all of the little intricacies and all of the controls that Kontakt gives to us, and how we can use those within Studio One. For many, this might seem very basic stuff, but I do often see that sometimes people are getting a little bit confused in relation to multiple outs and what it all kind of means, what we can use it for. Now, there are two versions of Kontakt. There's the Kontakt player, which enables us to load licensed libraries with a native instruments license. A native instruments license is where the developer has paid native instruments for a set amount of keys, which you can then use within the native access program to authorize that library. Generally, what you'll find is that the libraries themselves, certainly from third parties, often don't have this license because it is a significant overhead. If you do come across a library that is licensed, then of course, if you've got Kontakt Player, you can use it. Simply download the file. It will come with a license key, and then you can activate that via native access. In order to use third-party libraries that don't have a native instruments license key with them, you will need to use the Kontakt full version. As of doing this video at the moment, Native Instruments currently have a sale where there's 50% off their Kontakt full version. So in the UK at the moment, that would be £179, and in the US, I think it would be around about $150. What we're going to do first of all is we're going to pull Kontakt into the Arranger window and onto a track. What you'll usually see first of all is the Libraries tab. The Libraries tab includes all of the artwork for each of the individual libraries. You can click on this little tab just below the image to expand the view and view the available libraries. These libraries then can be dragged into the blank space on the right-hand side to load the library. You can hit the X here to close it out and remove that library completely. A little tip for you, if we were to drag an instrument into the view here, there are a number of tools above us here. This is what we call the multi-rack. It enables us to have multiple racks of Kontakt instrument libraries. For most people, they generally won't use this, but it's worth noting that if you want to, you can add KSP script into the top window here. And this enables you to apply script post-processing to the libraries. You have access to your aux sends. And you also have this little toggle button here, which minimizes each of the library windows for you. You can do that here with this little minimize button. Go to your auxes here for this particular library. And of course, a different version of minimizing that still gives you access to the library name, the output, the MIDI channel, the number of voices used, the amount of memory loaded into RAM, and of course the maximum amount of voices allowed. This drop down here that says purge with a little arrow next to it, if we click on this, we can reset our markers. This is the start of loop markers. We can update the sample pool. For most, they won't use this. But here's a really nice little option, purge all samples. As we can see at the moment, if we look here, there is 0.68 gigabytes of samples loaded into RAM. If I click purge all samples, it's now 0. If I press a note, it loads the respective samples into RAM. This can be really useful if you're actually quite low on RAM. Maybe 16 gigabytes of RAM may not be enough for, a full orchestral ensemble. So by purging the samples, what you're doing is you're saying, the notes that I'm not playing, I don't want to load into RAM. This can be extremely useful because if your piece only uses an octave of keys, well, you could be saving yourself several octaves of unloaded samples. If you'd like to reload all of the samples into RAM, of course, you can do that here. Hit reload all samples, and then we're back to 0.68 gigabytes of RAM. If you have multiple libraries loaded into Kontakt, like that, what we can now do is we can solo a particular library. Click once more to unsolo it, or we could just mute the library. One thing you'll notice in this window here is that the first instrument is set to ST1. This stands for stereo 1. It's a stereo output. And of course the MIDI channel is on port A and it's MIDI channel 1. The second instrument is also loaded to stereo output 1, but the MIDI channel is set to port A, MIDI channel 2. What this means is that with one track loaded into Studio 1, when we press that key again, we only hear the first instrument. Sometimes you'd like to be able to stack libraries amongst each other and have the sounds play together at the same time. To do this, simply select Omni. And that means that the instruments loaded in that are assigned to the Omni channel will all play at the same time. This can be really useful if you're combining strings together, or maybe choirs. Experiment with it and spend at least an hour a day or an hour a week, whatever you can afford, to play around without the commitment to finishing a complete piece of work. This way you'll hopefully gain an understanding through doing and will help you when it comes to writing music. So, with the main window out of the way, we'll close these down. The main menu at the top here has a little disk icon. For those of us that remember floppy disks, that's the icon here. We can click this icon and we can say, I'd like to create a new instrument. If you do that, you'll load a blank instrument. In order to use this, you would hit the wrench icon at the top left. Now this might be a little bit overwhelming if you've never really used this part of Kontakt before, but the basics of it are essentially the mapping editor in the center. This is where we would load our samples in and we can drag them wherever we would like. If we take something from our files, such as some piano samples, so what we'll do is we'll load these in here. We can drag them in, and if we move our mouse whilst holding the left mouse button down and go to the top, it's going to spread the samples across the entire range of the keyboard. If we move our mouse further down, it's going to assign the keys individually. Of course, you can add these samples in one by one, but it's important to note that when you load your samples in, it's useful to have them key labeled. What I mean by key labeled is that at the end of the sample file, you might have underscore C1, which denotes the note on the keyboard that it should be assigned to. The problem therein lies, well, how do I know that that's going to be on the C1 key when I drag it in? Well, you actually don't need to worry about that too much. There are a number of features within Kontakt that enable you to process these in a batch configuration. We go to Batch Tools, And in this instance, we've dragged 2 velocity layers of the same sample in. We can now go to Batch Tools and say, I would like to auto apply the crossfades for the velocity. When I do that, the window in here changes, and there'll be a nice smooth transition between, say, for example, the C note at the beginning here, and its lower velocity to the higher velocity. Once you've loaded your samples in, you should make a sound. Now, there are a couple of source menu options underneath. Don't necessarily delve into this too much for the moment, but it does give you the ability to do lots of different things, such as use a time machine, which enables you to tune the samples differently. And of course, we've got the wavetable mode, which enables us to take the samples and use them as a wavetable. So in a way, this is a little bit of synthesis that we can use within Kontakt. Anyway, less on that for now. What I don't want to do is end up getting people bogged down in the weeds of how to do multiple routing for modulation down here and that sort of thing just yet. But let's assume that we're happy with the instrument. We can hit the wrench icon and now we can go to save. We can save this as whatever we would like, and of course that's entirely up to you. You can save it wherever you'd like, and we'll just call this new piano. When we save it, it's going to transform all of the files over to that folder, and when you need that instrument again, you can simply load it back in. If you've just recently created something, load to recent and do piano, and that will load the piano in for us. Now, when it comes to using Kontakt on a daily basis, we'll assume that you've got some libraries, maybe some free ones as well. The difference obviously between the free libraries and the paid ones that you would see in this window here is that the libraries in here have a Native Instruments license. This is something that the developer has paid Native Instruments for in order to obtain the keys that they give to their customers to register their products with native access. When it comes to licensed libraries, when you hear the term unlicensed libraries, or this library doesn't have a license of Native Instruments, it doesn't mean that it's a no-no and a bad thing and you can't download it. It simply means that the developer didn't have the funds or couldn't afford the overheads to pay the license to Native Instruments for those keys. I suppose the only caveat is that you won't be able to load these libraries in here. But what you can do is you can navigate to your Files tab, and we could take something like this open source Alpine orchestra, which has a number of instruments in there. We could take, for example, this Alpine bass ensemble and simply drag it in. We can tell that it's an instrument because it's not a folder like these folders here. It's a little keys icon which tells us that it's an instrument, and of course when we press a note it makes a sound. Close it out like we did with the ones previously. We'll head to our Libraries tab, and what we're going to do here is we're going to load in a few instruments and look at how we route those. So what we'll do first of all is we'll load in these legato patches. There'll be 5 of them, and then what we'll do is we'll minimize them once they're loaded in. We'll hit that button at the top to make life easy for ourselves, and we can see that we've got the 5 instruments in there for us. Now, what we'll need to do first of all is think about how we want to use these. We could, of course, have them on their own individual track. Now, if we do that, what we'll need to do is duplicate the tracks in the Arranger window. So we can hold down a Control or Command key and keep dragging down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we have 5 instances of the track within the Arranger. The problem here being that if I was to select the third track, which would be the violas, and press the key, only the violins part plays. And the violins part is assigned to the first output. Do you remember when we looked at those and it said KT, ST1? There we go. So we got these ST1, the MIDI channel port A, and the number being 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course if we go down a little bit further, 5. So the thing with this is that the instruments themselves aren't doing anything wrong by being loaded in this way. It's simply something that we need to change so that we can do with it as we please. Luckily for us, Kontakt has got some nice tools that enable us to do this quickly. If we go to this panels option here, and what we're going to do is go down to about just below halfway and select outputs. When we do this, we can see our preset or batch configuration options drop down. We can click that button and then we can say batch functions. Then this really long-winded option here, which is clear output section and create one individual channel for each loaded instrument. We'll click that and you'll see that the outputs have all changed. They've been named based on what the library is called, and that applies to all of the instruments available to us in this instance of Kontakt. All the ports are routed, so they all have their own individual MIDI channel, which is what we might want if we're playing these instruments individually and not as part of an ensemble. So let's press that key again and see if I hear the violas. Well, wouldn't you have it? We don't hear the violas. There's a reason for that. As we said before, the MIDI channels are what really control what goes into the outside world. So what we need to do is we need to make some changes with this particular track and this instrument in Studio One. Well, it's actually really easy. What we'll simply do is go to this drop down here, and if we hover over it, it will say outputs. We can click on that option and we can select as many options as we want, but in this instance we're going to select 5 because we have 5 instruments loaded. We can move away from that. What happens now? Nothing. It's all exactly the same. But what we have done is we've prefaced this by creating the 5 individual tracks within the Arranger. We can hit F4 to open the inspector. If you're not too comfortable with your shortcut keys, there's a little eye icon just next between the wrench and the hamburger menu here for our track list and the option for our options. Hover over that and it will say inspector. Okay, so let's start from the top. What's happening with the first one? So I'll have a look at this window here and it says out, up, Kontakt, output. That's what we should be hearing, is the instrument coming out of Kontakt. What about the input? Well, the instrument channel is set to event input 1 currently. What we might want to do with the second one is have that come out of event input 2 and event input 3 and 4 and 5. So if we press on the violas track and press a key, hey, look, we've got the viola sound coming out. We can minimize those now because we don't need to use the other controls. So now that we're able to control each of the tracks individually, what's happening in the console and how can we use that. So we'll close the instrument out because we've done everything in there that we need to at the moment. We'll head over to the mix console. And we can see, like we do with our drums, for example, we've got a number of channels available to us in the console. I've got many of the windows open here for the instruments, so we can see each of the individual instruments to confirm that they are what they say they are, which is great. But what we don't see here is, say for example, I select the fourth channel here, which is the cellos. I can see my record arm and monitor button highlighted, but nothing happens within the console. And that's because the channels aren't routed correctly at the moment. Now this is fine, it's totally workable and you don't need to go past this step. But if you are kind of finicky and you like to make sure that this is correct, head over to the second channel where we've got the channel icon here. We're going to select down to the third, down again to the fourth and to the last one. Now if I select the second channel, it's highlighted in my console. And this can be extremely useful in making mix decisions or even writing decisions. So when we've got to that stage, what else can we do here? Well, as with all other instruments in Kontakt, we can color label and we can name our tracks if we would like to. In this instance, I'll simply use my shorthand and I will use the tab key to move to the next track. Rename all of those, and because we've set the channels and everything's actually corresponding with each other, the name should update in the console as well. The great thing about this is that if I was listening to my song and I thought to myself, hey, I'm mixing right now, but in the cellos I can hear this weird little blip going up and down, it could be that you've just left in a very, very short MIDI note that you didn't intend to. And that's why I like to do it this way, so that when I'm actually working on the cellos and I have this particular channel highlighted and I spot something that might need to be changed, it's already highlighted to me in the arranger window. And this enables me just a quick way to navigate based on what's happening in the arranger and the console. So what if we do something a little bit different with Kontakt? We'll load in another instance of Kontakt here. And maybe what we would like to do is stack some instruments together. So we'll pick something from this library here, and we'll pick 3 sounds from there. And we'll load these in. Okay, once loaded in, I'm going to minimize these. And like we mentioned before about setting the MIDI channels, we're going to set these to Omni. By setting to Omni, they should all go through the same MIDI channel. And that's doing exactly what we want to do. So we could just call this one Organic Pads, or OPads for short. And now we've got 3 instruments loaded into here, and at any point if we feel that we wouldn't want one of these instruments to be heard, we could simply press mute, rather than doing something a little bit more destructive, like deleting it. Now the thing is, why would we load multiple instruments into one instance of Kontakt? Well, the reason why we would do this is it actually does help with your resources a little bit. Now for most people, if you're only working on, say, maybe 20 tracks, this might not be a deal breaker for you because you have enough headroom where it's actually not going to be that much of a bother. But if you're working with a larger template or a larger song, this can be really helpful in cutting down on your usage of your CPU. If we're in an instance where we're creating a template and we wouldn't want to load everything all at the same time when we load our template up, then Studio One gives us a really neat feature which enables us to simply disable the instrument. We can right click, select Disable Track, so that when we try to edit it, it's going to say that this device is disabled. If we enable the track, that gives us access to it, and everything is as it was when it was disabled. This again is a huge way to save on resources. So let's say we're creating a template. What I would usually do is once I've got all my libraries set in, I would then go to Disable Selected Tracks. That's going to turn everything off. And what we'll do is we'll save this as a template. We'll save this as a template and we'll give it a name that we'll be able to pick out really easily. So we'll call this 1.1 template. And we'll say OK. I want to create a new song. I'm going to select from my user templates the 1.1 template. This is going to be a new song that we create now. So now that we've loaded it up, it was instant, even though we have lots of libraries in here that we might want to use. Now the thing is, usually when we're trying to make creative decisions with a template, it's really to help remove the procrastination when it comes to picking sounds and libraries. We've already set the sounds up ready. It's just a case of when do we want to use them. And when we want to use them, we can simply say, I'd like to enable that track, please. Thank you very much. It's now available to me. And I could do the same with this. As it's a multi-out, I only need to enable one of them to make all of them available to me. There we go. So that, for most people, should be enough to get you using Kontakt maybe a little bit more. As I mentioned, there are free versions, there are paid versions. The same goes for libraries as well. If a library developer has the option to buy them a cup of coffee or support them in any way, such as donating some money for the use of their software and their hard work in sampling, then do what you can and support them. Because many developers do spend a lot of their own personal time creating these things for us to use. And of course, as I mentioned, as I'm making this video, Kontakt is currently half price. So it's a good time to get it if you were thinking about getting it. If you've got gear acquisition syndrome, hang off a little bit. Maybe you don't need it just yet. You've probably got 10,000 other plugins to work your way through first. But anyway, on that note, have a lovely day and keep making awesome music. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.